Welcome back to another edition of the Prepper Recon Podcast. Our mission is to bring you great interviews with preppers from around the world so you can be better informed and better prepared for everything from a hurricane to the end of the world as we know it. I've been purchasing gold and silver from JM Bullion since before they were a show sponsor because they have the lowest price of any dealer I know of. JM Bullion now offers free shipping on all orders. Check them out online today at jmbullion.com. I put together a compact individual first aid kit, or IFAK, that's perfect for gunshot wounds, car accidents, and other traumatic injuries. It's a MOLLE-compatible pouch in Coyote, ACU, or Black. It's equipped with an Israeli battle dressing, quick clot, an Asherman chest seal, nasopharyngeal airway, a TK4 tourniquet, 3 pre-threaded nylon sutures, EMT shears, betadine swabs, steri strips, and lots of extras. It's perfect for your glove box, bug-out bag, or home first aid kit. Go to the PrepperRecon.com homepage and click on the IFAK store tab at the top of the page. $99 includes shipping, and this kit could save your life. Today's guest is Gary, aka Georgia Brewer. Gary recently moved to a homestead property to live a more resilient lifestyle. Gary, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks, Mark. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure. There's a lot of preppers out there that have dreams and aspirations like mine to eventually get out to a farm and be able to be more self-sufficient and grow a little bit more of our own food and provide our own protein and have a good source of fresh water and those types of things. So we'd like to get a little education on how you did it. But maybe first we'd like to know, when did you first wake up to the need to prepare?
Well, it's actually been a real transformation in thinking over the last, I'm really going to go back to probably 2008, 2009. And it's really been like I said, a transformation in the way my wife and I have thought about things. Initially, it wasn't on my radar screen to do anything like this, to move out of the, quote, city where we were previously. We started looking at things going on around us, mostly in the political scene. And I'll just say quite honestly and very humbly is that I was not very political. Conservative thinking, I would usually pull the lever for the R candidate and things like that, but really very ignorant to what was going on. We started kind of waking up to what was happening in the country, things that we didn't like seeing happening. We got involved in the process. In 2009, we were one of those patriots that went to Washington. We carried the signs. Was never had any of this in my background, was never an activist. And so, as we began to really get better educated about really what was going on in our processes, we really started making a transformation from even the political ends of things and seeing where, how things were going as far as can they be fixed? Ultimately, we started really getting involved, getting a lot more educated, I guess is really the best way to put it. And I quickly found out that what we were being served up by our, mainstream media outlets, really was just, talking points, blurbs, and, used to buy into that and never really looked beyond what we were being, fed through these normal outlets, the mainstream outlets. And so, really just started getting more educated, realizing that, with the economy the way it was, things were not sustainable, that, basically the piper's going to have to be paid sooner or later. And, it's actually been so long. I don't remember all the various places we looked and listened, but, really just kept exploring. And that, by the way, that continues to the present time. I think once you've pulled your head out of the sand, or opened up Pandora's box, it's really hard to put it back in again. So anyway, kind of almost to the present time, or we started, realizing that, and by the way, I do live in Georgia, and we were, really not too far from Atlanta. in the suburbs of the Atlanta area, and very populated area. And when I started looking at the possibilities of what we could and couldn't do with property, we realized that we probably should go somewhere else and find some property to be able to do some of the things we wanted to do. Kind of in a high-level capsulized view, that's really kind of what brought us to beginning that search.
Yeah, and when you look at Atlanta from outer space, it's one of the brightest spots on the entire globe. So that typically means that there's a lot of people that are using all those street lights and things that are illuminating that city from way up in outer space. So so yeah, that is a very populated area, and it probably would not be a good place to be when the stuff hits the fan.
Exactly. Our thoughts exactly. And you know, we really, you know, we were in a very, for anybody that knows this area, it's a very, kind of, you know, they say United States is a melting pot for the world. Well, Atlanta's kind of a melting pot for the United States. We have a very, very diverse group, of folks, and just not really knowing, you know your immediate neighbors, but you're just not knowing where people's heads are at. And then, like I said, back to the aspects of things that, I started to come to this realization that, so many things were being dictated in that, you know, living in a community, and I was in like a 500 plus home community that, there was, you know, you just didn't know what your circumstances were. And then being in a homeowners association, there was things I started to want to do with my property that I just couldn't do there. It just, you know, I mean, I started looking at, you know, livestock. I don't mean cows and horses or anything on a standard size lot, but really, you know, things like maybe having some egg laying chickens and things like that. Well, you just couldn't do that. And also there were many aspects to this. I'm not that many years away from retirement. I wanted to look at a place to where, it was more affordable. And this is the aspect of the financial aspects of all of this. You know, of getting, debt free, being able to, be more self-sufficient in every aspect of that. And it's just amazing how many areas that you can explore when you get into self-sufficiency and trying to do more for yourself rather than being dependent upon, certainly dependent upon either government or the rules of where you live and things like that. And we really wanted to find a place, where I could cut expenses, not pay homeowners fees for amenities that I no longer use. All my children are grown now. I didn't need the bigger house, didn't need the nicer community, didn't need the school system that we were nearby. And so, we began, slowly to begin that search because I didn't have to do it. It was a personal choice.
And not having a homeowners association, that's another layer of government that you don't have dictating to what you can and can't do. So don't you miss that?
Oh, yes, I do. I miss those board meetings. Sometimes, you know, it's funny you say that because your local government, whether it be your homeowners association or your school board or going to the commissioners meeting for the county, that's at a much more personal level, you know, or they're much closer to affecting your way of life. So there was really some eye-opening experiences through that. People are people no matter what position they're in. It's amazing how, you know, quote, good old boy networks can come into play, or who you know, whose palm is being greased by maybe, you know, whoever. And you just start finding these things out, and it's quite eye-opening.
Now, when you decided to move to a more rural area, was Mrs. Brewer on board right away?
Well, she by the time we made that decision to find some property, get a little bit further, quote, out of Dodge, as I like to put it, I think we were on the same page when we got to that point, but early on, before we realized that we really wanted to leave, and when I started taking on a more of a the quote prepper mindset of self-sufficiency and doing more for myself, and there was some aspects of that early on she wasn't comfortable with, and part of that, it wasn't the buying supplies, having, that if the stuff hit the fan, that we would be able to feed ourselves. And let me just add this. I grew up in South Florida. I lived around Hurricane Alley. I mean, I was a young child at the time, but I went through a few hurricanes. And there was always that in the back of my mind. I mean, literally, and once again, this was probably fed to me by my local, TV station, weatherman or whatever, about having that 3-day supply of, Dinty Moore beef stew and a can of Spam and a couple bottles of water or something, and that crank radio. Of course, at that time, they didn't even have the crank radios. But I grew up with that mindset, and it was always there. But as I began to understand more of what was going on in our country and where things were not potentially, I believe they are headed in that direction. I think it's a mathematical, it's going to happen, that more than likely we're going to have some type of economic collapse precipitated either by just the monetary policies or something terrible happening in a way of terrorism or something. But, beyond the scope of prepper supplies, those kinds of things, water and food and a Berkey water system and those types of things. She was always on board with that. Just left that up to me mostly because she didn't understand it all too well in the beginning. But I think one aspect of it that she was somewhat initially negative to, and this is part of her personality, is other people that we didn't know, that were really potential strangers that also had the same mindset. And I don't have to tell probably the audience that may be listening to this, although that population of people has grown over the last, say, few years, and the acceptance of that, to some degree at least, in some circles has become more acceptable. 5 years ago, it was, except for, quote, survivalists, there weren't too many people talking about this. So in meeting other people that we didn't know, that weren't in our neighborhood, that had that mindset that we may needed to rely on one another, and I'm really kind of specifically talking about, some people give it different names, say, I like to use the word MAG group, a mutual assistance group. We've entered into some discussions with that, and initially there was some balking going on there. But once I fully was able to explain it and handed her a 1 second after book and need to read this, to understand the need that we have to help each other. And so I'll also say we're both Christians. Faith is really number one in our lives. I'll say through all of this, if anything, we've grown closer, to the Lord through this experience. I say, a life change really, that we've met folks. And I don't believe in coincidences. I think through prayer and a true desire to just do the right thing, to live a good life, and to live a life that's where we need to help others that aren't knowledgeable to these things. That was a growth period for both of us. So the move itself, once we made that decision to start looking, I think we were pretty much on the same page.
And did you find your new farm right away, or was there a process of a lot of looking and praying about getting the right place, and did you have any deals fall through? And then also part two of that same question, once you did find your perfect place, did you have a buyer for your home right away, or was there any challenges associated with all of that?
Well, I have to share, there were lots of challenges with this. Our thinking went on before last year, but in hindsight, I guess, a year maybe isn't that long of a time. But when we actually actively started looking, it was really a year ago, January, and we began looking. And once again, it wasn't for a job change. It wasn't that I had to go somewhere. So, we weren't, going crazy with it, feverishly looking, but we were out most weekends. And because I do work and my wife is retired, she had the opportunity to do a lot of the legwork and getting on the computer, getting on realestate.com, getting on Zillow and all these different places. This is long before we engaged some help through a realtor, but we began our own search. And anybody that uses the internet knows there's a lot of information that you can do on your own. And and let me backstep for a second. I mean, we thought about even leaving our state. Once again, with the mindset of being around, other folks of like mind, Christian, conservative minded, liberty loving people that believe in liberty, people that believe, in what our foundation was based on, what our founders, envisioned for us. And we were looking, and we'd been to Texas, and, I think it was a few years ago, we did go to one of the, Glenn Beck, events in Dallas, and I took an extra 3 or 4 days, and we looked at the area. I think part of it was we were there in July, and it was god awful hot. But, we really came to, and we prayed about it. Yes, we did a lot of prayer with this, and we knew Georgia, we knew our general area, we knew the area north of us, and we liked it. I liked the climate here overall. I like that it's lush, and you go north, anywhere north of Atlanta, you start getting into more hilly and there are mountains, although they're small mountains, but so we decided, we made the decision when we started looking that we would probably stay in our state, and we started those looks, we'd look them up, and she'd get a laundry list of some places, and we'd jump in the car and we'd drive. And, it was not easy. It was not easy, in that, I had a laundry list of things I was looking for, and there wasn't a real long one, but there were specific things, obviously location and kind of being off beaten paths, but not, we didn't want to be completely in the sticks or in dog patches, they say. We wanted to be close enough to shopping and other things, but yet, still, in a rural setting. And then we also needed to make sure that we had a place that had a natural water source, spring or a creek or river or lake or, big pond, or even, access to well and everything. So that was paramount. And then of course I wanted open area. Once again, this area is very lush. There are many areas with lots of trees and shade. I wanted to make sure that I found a place that was suitable to put in a nice big garden. And so there were a lot of and then we didn't want to build. Our pockets aren't that deep. We wanted to find a place that already had a home, and so on. So that list, it was discouraging at times. And then, we actually did enter into, we found a place that we really liked on about 10 acres at one point. Without all the bloody details, it was a short sale. Anybody that's dealt with a short sale, I don't really recommend it, but, we found out this place actually had two banks we had to deal with. Well, ultimately that went on for months, and I'm going to say it was about 4 or 5 months. We really liked the place. The property was beautiful property. It was located about where we wanted to be. It had, it was a, quarter mile back to get to the property. It had pasture. It had a lake on it. It had, half of it was heavily wooded around the perimeter of it. I mean, it fit, but ultimately it all fell through. Banking issues and things like that. Not on me, on that end. So we had to walk, and we had to start looking again. And, ultimately we found the place that we ended up with, after looking for about 7 or 8 months. And, that took a little bit of a process too. And, here we are. Now you asked me about selling my house. That was interesting too. We were in I had a nice home. I mean, I can humbly say it was a nice home in a very nice community, in a much sought after community, because of the school system. The school system there, our daughter went through all the schools there, the elementary, the middle, the high school, and it's highly accredited, and it was sought after. We honestly thought there would absolutely be no trouble selling our home. And I can't even really to this day explain it other than we weren't supposed to move when we moved. Could look at that a lot of different reasons. I don't believe in coincidences, but it took 7 months to sell our home. And this is in a community that normally homes sell within 3 or 4 weeks. And so that finally took place. But what was really here's the I think the God part here is that the weekend that we got the offer on our home, the place that we're in now, which by the way had fallen through 2 months prior, we placed another offer on it, and within 48 hours we had deals on both ends. And I mean, we just were, totally amazed at that. I mean, really joyfully amazed. And so we've actually, this is new for us. We've only been here 4.5 months. So it's been a very new and recent thing.
So the moral of that story is when God closes the door, just leave the door shut and wait, because he's got something else for you. If he closes one door, he's going to open something else. And when he opens the door, you're going to know it, because all the doors are going to open at the same time, and you're going to be able to just walk right through. And don't settle for something that if you know you want a certain type of property and you want certain things on that property, water sources and woodlands and a structure that has good bones, or it's in decent shape, then don't settle and hold out for that stuff, right?
That would absolutely be my advice. And I mean, I'll be the first to admit I am not a patient person. That's one of my my defects of character that I work on. I'm not a patient person, but I think I was taught some things through this, quite frankly, and I definitely wholeheartedly believe that, and I know for a fact, I believe in my heart that was answered, and it happened so quickly in the end there to show exactly what you just illustrated. And yes, I think it's very important to know what you want, have a pretty good idea of it, be willing to compromise on some things, but those aspects of why you would be making this type of a shift, a change, I think the fundamentals need to be there. And you should wait till you find those fundamentals. And they are out there, but it's not as readily available as if you were just in the market for just another home in another community and you had no thoughts of some of the things I've just talked about. Then yeah, those things may go faster. But I think looking for a homestead, looking for a small farm, you're not always going to find necessarily a turnkey. I think you have to be realistic about expectations, but yes, prayer and belief in that prayer, it will come to pass.
And then what type of improvements did you have to make to your property?
Well, when we moved here, the truth of the matter is it's pretty much a turnkey operation. Now, turnkey for me. I say that laughingly because for any of the men listening or any men out there, I think a lot of us could probably live in a cave as long as we had a refrigerator, a TV, and a clicker. But
Mrs. Brewer, not so much.
There you go. No, she's really good about things too, but, any man worth his salt makes sure that his wife gets what she wants, with regard to, decorating a place and getting things. So we have made changes, and we've made a fair amount of changes here actually, but, There were, the house was built in the early 90s, and there were just some things that we wanted to upgrade. And then there were some things I wanted to, one thing we knew coming into that we needed was a new roof. The roof was not leaking or anything, but it did need a new roof. It was the original roof. And so we went with the traditional metal red roof, and I have 2 outbuildings. I've got a detached, a workshop garage, and I've also got a small barn. We put the roof on all 3 buildings, and it looks pretty nice. And, as far as improvements, or not so much improvements, but things I wanted to do, and, back to what I said earlier about like chickens, the previous owner, and there was actually an owner before that did have horses on the property. I don't know if I mentioned this. This is a little over 6 acres. It actually wasn't quite as big as I originally wanted, but, I'm kind of glad it's only 6 acres now. Because, we can get into that in a minute, the amount of work, there needs to be an expectation that there will be work involved. But I found a couple of really great guys here locally, that were contractors. My wife and I are fairly handy, but I also have a full-time job. Found a couple guys that were very reasonable, very skilled. And I've had, they've done a lot of the work here that I've wanted to get done. And one of those was to have one of the stalls that used to be a horse stall, and it was open. It had the slanted roof on it, but it was pretty much opened up. I had that closed into a chicken coop. And, a few people that have seen pictures of it, think it's really nice, and they'd like one themselves. So I've got 8 chickens out there right now. And, that's where I've kind of started there. And, as far as overall improvements, that was some of it. I had to have the driveway fixed and needed gravel, things like that. But it was pretty much a turnkey, other than things that I really wanted to do with it to make some improvements.
And have you added any other animals besides chickens so far?
Well, no, not yet. But part of the conversation where I was talking about, having realistic expectations, I'm still a healthy guy. I'm getting towards some, I guess maybe golden years, but, I'm not as, I'm just not as young as I used to be. I came in here and I've been, humbled at times with the work that's involved with taking care of or trying to create a homestead for yourself. And, I didn't own a tractor. I always took care of a standard lot property. Had my walk behind mower, which I did bring with me. Doesn't get much use now because with 6 acres of property, I would be out there for weeks on end cutting it. But I did start thinking about a tractor. I started looking at them and, had some sticker shock on that, quite frankly. If anybody's gone out and priced brand new Kubota tractors, they'll understand what I'm saying. But my property basically segmented into a total of 6.5 acres, and 4 of it is pasture land, that I'm fortunate in one regard. It is fenced in already, but with just, electrical fence, 4-wire electrical fence, which is suitable for cattle and horses. And, I'm right now pondering what livestock that I may want to put out there to keep my pasture in check. And I'm talking about, kept up by, grazing animals. And I'm actually looking at the possibility of some goats. And I think I can use the fence that I have now, but it's going to have some adjustments made to it and some work done. And, so that's, in fact, on this weekend, I'm going to be visiting with a local farm, somebody that I've met locally, that does raise goats, and I'm going to be talking to him about it because I've not made that decision yet. So I'm not sure, but, the property up here is very slopey. It's very hilly. I did buy a zero turn mower, which is a wonderful piece of equipment. But even that on some of this very slopey, terrain, has given me some pause on concerns about getting hurt. And not, and understanding fully my property, the nuances of it. I have a couple of spring heads, that once again, part of my water sources when I was but that area is very brushy. It has some ravines in it, and there's just a lot of considerations that I'm discovering continuously.
And now, what size garden are you planning to put in this year?
Well, I have laid that out, and it's funny, before we moved, I think it was through Facebook or something, someone mentioned, this was before I landed this property, or I think it was in process, and I said I planned on putting in a big garden, and somebody sent me a link to, Back to Eden Gardens. They call them BTEs, Back to Eden Gardens. There's actually a website for that. I encourage people actually to look into this. I'm going to be giving that a whirl. It's organic gardening. And the gentleman I think that started this, I think he's in Washington State now. I think he used to live in California. And they have a documentary film that's about 2 hours. I ordered that. I watched it. It's once again, it's organic gardening. It's really, they call it Back to Eden because the concepts here are really the way God intended for us to live and to garden, before the fall, I guess, and even since then. But it's really it gets into not tilling, not having to use commercial fertilizers and pesticides. Not to get too much into that, but I did set up the framework for that. Meaning, I've set up, literally a 32 by 48 foot area. I did bring in, compost from a local, place here in Toccoa, Georgia. I brought in about 25 cubic yards of compost, and then I was able to find a source for some free wood chips from a local, arborist. And, once again, I won't get too much into depth in this, but it could be a subject all on its own, but it's really meant to be self-sustaining. In that, each year and actually over time, doesn't have to be each year. You apply, on top of that compost material, which is about 3 to 4 inches in depth, you apply wood chips, and then those, 2 to 3 inches maybe of wood chips. And you don't plant in the wood chips, you actually plant within the compost. And then once you get some growth, you push those chips back around the plant, whether they're tomatoes, peppers, whatever you're growing. And then over time, and I'm talking about year, 2 years, things like that, that wood chip material begins to break down and then becomes part of a compost material. And then you put more wood chips on top of that. Now for fertilizer, that's what I plan my chickens. Now it may not be enough at first. I probably have to supplement that, but my next door neighbor who's on a 7-acre property next to me has about 5 horses. I plan on getting manure from him. I plan on getting manure from my chickens, and those will be my fertilizers. And, this is all new to me. I'll confess. This is all new to me. I don't know if it's going to be successful or not. I can't answer that right now. I hope to tell you maybe in 6 months or so, how much success, because I'm planning on planting that garden this weekend, with a whole variety of things: tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, beans. I ordered recently one of the, heirloom, and I plan on using heirloom seeds, non-GMO, and because I want to be able to harvest those seeds for all the reasons, for sustainability and to have them if they're not available to me at some point.
Absolutely. And then if you eventually get some other grazing animals of your own, you'll have that also for fertilizer as well.
That's right. Yep. Sure.
But for now, the chicken manure and then the horse manure from your neighbor, what will you do? You'll mix that in with your compost, because it's those are both hot manures, right? That they have to be composted first before you can utilize them.
Well, yeah, I'm learning a little bit about this. One thing in my reading, I found out that the reason why chicken manure is such a wonderful fertilizer, natural fertilizer, is because with fowl, they excrete. Everything is their urine and their feces is combined, and where with horses and cows and things like that, it's doesn't have that. I guess what I'm leading into is the nitrogen content, which is in urine. And so, I could not speak with a lot of authority on this. I've recently, in my exploration of back to the livestock issue, and when I first got the chickens, I recently purchased Chickens for Dummies and Raising Goats for Dummies. They were both recommended books, and look, I am not quite Mr. Douglas from Green Acres, but I am a city guy. And my little garden in the city comprised tomatoes, peppers, and maybe maybe an eggplant or something like that. I used to have very tiny gardens because of the space allocation, and also my last home I had too much shade, and I couldn't grow anything because of the shade. So I'll say this again. I am very humbled and have been humbled by what I don't know. I am a pretty quick learner, but I'm learning as I go here. There's a lot to do. And, at times, I'll go out there and I'll sit out there on the plot that I've got set up for my garden, and I'll sit there sometimes when I feel overwhelmed, and I try to just let go of it. I'll pray about it and ask for help, and then I start moving forward.
And fortunately, since you've moved to the homestead prior to the collapse, there are all these resources where you can get online, or you can buy a book or whatever. And if you fail, you can always go to the grocery store and stock up, because you're not going to starve to death this winter because you planted your tomatoes too close together.
Right, that's exactly right. Very, very, very true. Or, even when I had the wood chips dropped off, the gentleman that dropped them off is an arborist, and so he was kind of interested in my garden, and he immediately says, you need to really get that soil tested. It might be too hot. Said some of the things you just mentioned too, and I've not done that yet. So I may, I may get a rude awakening when this starts, but a lot of times the best way we learn is through trial and error. I'm trying to avoid as many pitfalls as possible. I am a voracious reader. Every night, usually the last hour of my day is in one of these books, my devotion, and then in one of these books, and then usually, I'm falling asleep with it in my lap. So, I'm trying to learn as much as I can. I'm trying to do as much as I can, and then also trying to be a little gentle with myself, because as I mentioned early on, I tend to be impatient and I want things now. And if they're happening fast enough, frustration sets in, and then I've got to reel myself back in again.
Sure. But yeah, so everybody needs to expect there to be a learning curve when you're transitioning into being more sustainable. And for folks that are maybe, they're not able to get out and buy the homestead, or for folks that are just purchasing the bug out, location, and they're not going to be purchasing a homestead, and they're just planning to move to the bug out location and start farming from scratch. Start doing what you can where you're at. Even if you're in an apartment and you can't do anything except grow a basil plant, just anything you can do to start familiarizing yourself with how plant systems work. And if you've got a little yard and you can get some rabbits or anything to just start familiarizing yourself with how livestock works, and learning. All of that is gonna make it that much easier if you ever have to transition over to 100% of providing for yourself, because I know just from this little garden and this little postage stamp yard of mine, there's a learning curve with all of it.
Oh yes, most definitely. There's, I've got a book on gardening too, and I've barely cracked the cover on that one. And like I said, back, I lived in South Florida too. I grew I've always had tomatoes. I love nothing like a farm fresh or garden fresh, vine ripened tomato, when they come in. I mean, the taste is just tremendous, but, you have nematodes, you have worms, things that happen, that just can wipe you out. And I just told my wife, I said, can you imagine, I remember the last time my last garden, when we really did get wiped out. I mean, literally over a course of a few days, we went on a vacation, came back, and they were pretty much devastated by tomato worms. And I said, you imagine if this was, we were depending on this? It was really eye-opening, really. I mean, to think in those terms, that if we were dependent on this, and having that happen. Yeah.
And what was the biggest challenge with your new homestead?
I really kind of touched on a little bit of that. I guess I'm one of those type A personalities, in that trying to have quite a bit of control over things. And I realize, and this is a small, I mean, I hear folks out there with 100-acre farms and things like that, and it just blows me away. I'm looking out, and I said, I look out at my property. It's only 6 acres, and I say only. I mean, it's a fair amount of land, property, but actually walking it and getting out there and having to take care of it. I mean, once again, I mentioned this earlier, just the aspects of mowing your grass. Okay, you do that on a weekend, on a Friday night, and you get to enjoy it over the weekend. Well, I went out there with the first time I used that zero turn, and it's, a 52-inch deck, and it's got a lot of horsepower and everything, but, I did half my property, and it took a while. I mean, and then I got down into that area that I mentioned earlier near the springs, and it has some, where heavy rains, because the property slopes down towards those spring heads, where they've channeled out some areas and stuff, and it's dangerous. And I think it's really important to know our limitations, physical limitations. And like I said, I'm in good health. I have no ailments. But I'm a guy in his late 50s, and I have to start recognizing some of my limitations. And I think it's just humbling of what we can do, what we can't do, what we may have to pay to have done, things like that. And then once again, being realistic with, and I came in here not having to take out trees and things like that. So I think on a financial standpoint is when you find that place, be realistic with how you want it to be for you, your wife, and your family. For any of those that are doing this with a family, does it meet your needs? Is it fitting the bill, that the laundry list that you set up? And I strongly suggest writing down specifics of what you feel are deal breakers. And not to compromise on those deal breakers. And it should be a realistic list. There should be some room for compromise, but on those important things, not to compromise on them, to keep looking if you've not found it. And, I've made some compromises even here. I'm quite frankly not as remote as I originally planned on being, but our thinking through this has evolved a little bit more too. I realize how important it is to have community, how important it is to have some neighbors, and to once you start understanding their thinking, starting to introduce the idea of helping each other in case something was bad. If that tornado, my next door neighbor talked about a tornado that had come through here shortly after Katrina. I think it was the same year of Katrina. And he talked about this tree being wiped out and that tree being wiped out and power being out for 2 weeks. And those kinds of conversations lend themselves to finding out how people think and being able to help each other. And even we found kind of as an aside here, we moved here because once again, we are Christians. We wanted to find a church community. We did find a church that we really, really like. And it's a church that's alive. And this pastor's on a prophecy, series right now. And and we've joined one of the social groups or, one of the small groups. It's really not so small. There's about 100 people in it. And he comes and talks, and he was talking about some of the prophecy and some things that are going on in the world right now. And it lent itself to a introductory discussion on people needing to help each other, people needing to be with different skills that can help each other. Or I've got chickens and I've got egg layers and I can give you some eggs and I got some stuff in my garden, versus the guy that's down the road from me that is raising livestock in the way of cattle, and maybe he's got beef. And those things, believe me, are paramount on my mind, should that need arise.
Absolutely. I think community is very, very important. And I don't necessarily subscribe that you have to be 500 miles away from the nearest town, because I don't really think that we're going to have the problem with the golden hordes rushing out of the cities and into the countryside to steal people's chickens and all of that kind of thing. I think that a lot of the people that the folks we have to worry about the most that live in the cities, that are living on the EBT cards, that may be cut off when everything hits the fan. I just don't think that they would have the knowledge or the skills to even be able to identify what corn looks like on the stalk, and I don't think they know how to prepare things. I think that they've spent their whole life stuffing stuff in the microwave, and if there's nothing in the freezer section, I think that they'll probably just curl up and die for the most part.
Yeah, I tend to lean towards your assessment there, that it wouldn't be necessarily a Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome situation, but and I can say that I've never had a belly that was empty and growling for days for hunger. Usually I go three hours between a meal, yeah. But I don't know what that's like. I've only read it in fiction. I've only thought about it in realities or seen those stories overseas, and we're all fortunate to live, at least still right now, in a country that where for the most part, we're not dealing with those types of challenges right now. But if we did lose that power grid tomorrow through whatever thing that might knock it out, and back to the reasons for self-sufficiency and all of this, is we all know that we live in a time where 90% of the population is in the city versus 10% in rural areas, where that was reversed during, the Great Depression. And also, we also know that we live in a time, and my company is like this, where you don't keep stock. This is not only just food stock, but this is parts for electronics, vehicles where technicians ride out on. They only carry exactly what they need. Nobody stocks anything any longer. I mean, when I was in high school, I worked my way. I worked at Winn-Dixie. I was a stock boy. I mean, I remember back pallets of rice and beans and canned goods that were in the back room. They don't do that any longer. We live in a society now that it's on-time delivery, sometimes multiple times in a day. Never mind those 2 trucks that used to come in once a week. And so those stores will be wiped out within hours, not days. What will people do? I mean, how desperate could people become without, for any length of time? I don't know. I don't know if there'd be a golden horde. I probably, maybe not, but I'm not going to bank on it, that not happening.
Sure. Yeah. You prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
That's right.
And, make sure you've got some way to secure yourself. And community is a big part of that too, because let's say it's just you and your wife, you can't work 12 hours of security and then have her work 12 hours of security, because then there's nobody to do farming or anything else. So you have to have community for that as well. Now, what plans do you have for the future of the homestead? Are you going to be putting in any solar, or have you thought about solar water pumps or anything like that to get the water to the house? Or what type of water system do you have now? Do you get in the water from the spring?
Yeah, well, it's actually, I have a well. I mean, it's like, I mean, the water is wonderful here, I have to say. I think because of the proximity to the mountains, in fact, I found out, I like to try to know as much about my property as I could, that the well even here is only 70 feet deep, and it's crystal clear water. In fact, the previous owner here didn't even have any kind of filtration system on it. For a while I didn't either, but just, added concerns, possible concerns. There was already a system in the basement for this well. I did put in some, filters and things like that. But right now, that is something I most definitely need to work on, because at this moment, if I lost power, I would lose my well. Because it is electric, that pump is electric. I do not have solar backup for it. I do not have a hand pump backup for it. But one thing I do have, and that's why probably it is on my short list, by the way, of things that I'm going to have redundancy for, and either both solar and or some type of hand pump. But I do have running water literally out of that 2 spring heads on the base of my property and I do have a Berkey system, and I do have a Katydin, and I have multiple, redundancy. I do, have some stored water. I'm also a home brewer and a winemaker, and so I have equipment that I use for that when I'm not using it, has water storage. But I do have to work on that. That is something on my short list. But I can at least go down with 5-gallon buckets down the end of my property, and I can fill them up with the spring water, and I can run them through the Berkey, and I have water to drink. So that part is somewhat covered, but I have things I do need to do. I do have plans for solar. I just do not have anything set up right now.
Well, that's very, very cool stuff. You've given us all a lot to think about, and for everybody out there that's sort of been playing around with the idea, it's so great to hear from somebody that actually stepped out in faith and did it. So we certainly appreciate all the great information that you've given us. And Gary, thanks again for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. It was wonderful being here. Thank you.
Hey Preppers and Patriots, American Meltdown, the long-awaited sequel to American Exit Strategy, is now available in Kindle and paperback. In American Meltdown, Book 2 of the Economic Collapse Chronicles, the new president, Anthony Howe, signs an executive order banning all semi-automatic weapons. Matt, Adam, and Wesley Baer begin training with their local militia for the battle that is coming. Within weeks of the inauguration, the $700 trillion derivatives bubble pops when rates on U.S. debt skyrocket. The derivatives crisis is the final nail in the coffin of the banking system and the death of the fiat currency system in America. With the dollar gone, commerce comes to a screeching halt. While times prove to be tough for all, survival favors the prepared. Get your Kindle or paperback copy of American Meltdown, Book 2 of the Economic Collapse Chronicles on Amazon today.